Welcome to the Happier and Healthier podcast. I'm your host, Maria Marlowe, and this is a place where we don't rely on good luck or good genes for our health and happiness, but rather we create it with our thoughts and our actions each and every single day. Each week, I'll bring you a thought or a guest that will help you live your happiest and healthiest life. Are you ready? Today's episode is on a topic that I've wanted to discuss for a really long time, but had some trouble locating the right expert to speak to it. Luckily, I finally found him, and he is uniquely qualified to talk about the dangers and the risks of Botox. His name is Ray Chester, and he is a civil trial lawyer who has represented over 50 cases against Allergan, the makers of Botox, for severe and even fatal injuries sustained after the use of the product. He's board certified in both civil trial law and personal injury trial law in the state of Texas. He's been named a top 100 trial lawyer, has achieved a number of firsts, and has garnered a ton of recognition and praise for his fearless work. Both Ray and I want you to know that there's absolutely no judgment for using it. And in fact, a little bit later on in the show, I'm going to be sharing my own personal experience using it. This conversation is simply meant to share the real risks and dangers associated with it so that you can make an informed decision, because unfortunately, oftentimes the risks are not adequately discussed before the injection. This podcast is brought to you by my Healthy by Marlowe nutrition course, the 8-week online, science-backed, doctor-approved course to help you slim down, improve your health, and most importantly, better understand and love your body. You'll learn how to tailor your diet to your unique needs so that you can banish bloating, improve your mood and energy, and slim down, all the while eating hearty, healthy meals that will keep you feeling energized and satisfied. Head to mariamarlowe.com/nutrition-course to start today. Well, first off, I want to start by saying I had to do a lot of detective work to even find you. I really wanted to find an expert who was knowledgeable about the dangers of Botox and who was also willing to talk about it. So I really appreciate you being on the show today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with one of your cases in particular. I know that you've represented over 50 people who've had injuries because of Botox, but there was one case in particular of Dr. Charla Helton, who was a physician and had some pretty serious injuries from doing Botox. Can you share a little bit about her story, what happened to her, and what it was like then going up against Allergan, the maker of Botox?
Sure. Charla Helton is a very unique individual, and her case was unique in my experience. It's the only Botox cosmetic case that actually went to trial. I tried several Botox cases across the country, but most of the others were for therapeutic or medical uses with higher dosages. Charla is a medical doctor. She's an OBGYN. She put herself through college and medical school, ended up being one of the owners and founders of the first women's hospital in Oklahoma City. She's a fantastic doctor, mother, wife, author. She's just a fantastic person. But in her early 40s, like many of us do, vanity got the best of her, and she got a couple of Botox injections. First one was no problem. After the second one, she quickly developed generalized weakness, couldn't get out of bed, went to several doctors, couldn't figure it out, eventually went to the National Institute of Health, NIH, was diagnosed with botulism, iatrogenic botulism, which means from medication. She also developed a crippling peripheral neuropathy and was forced to give up her medical practice.
Wow. So yeah, that's pretty serious. So she injected it in her face, right, for wrinkles. Is that correct?
Right. She didn't inject it herself, obviously,
Well,
but
right.
right.
But that was
Some
how
people
she
do, though. Some people do.
I'm sure. Actually, I've been seeing all of these news articles now that people are rushing to the doctor's office to get Botox now that the quarantine is over, or and stories of doctors trying to be like being bribed by their patients to give them Botox during quarantine. So you never know. But okay, so she developed this crippling illness as a result of the injection. And then what was it like going to court with this case?
Well, Charlotte had already been turned down by basically every lawyer in Oklahoma. One of them actually filed her case at one point, but got completely run over by the Allergan lawyers and dropped her case. And so she contacted me as sort of a last resort because I was out in California trying a different Botox case. And Allergan did absolutely everything they could to ruin her life and her husband's life. They tried to discredit her. They called her a malingerer. They called her a liar. Allergan is one of the most fearsome opponents in civil litigation that you could ever imagine. They hardly settle any cases. They make everyone go to trial, and they make you earn it. That's one reason why they've been so successful with their product and why people are so scared to sue over Botox cases.
And then what was the outcome, though, of her case?
We won. We got a verdict for $15 million. They appealed for 3.5 years. It was eventually affirmed by the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And with interest, it came out to over 18 million.
Wow. And is that common, or what typically happens? Or it sounds like most lawyers, they take it to court, and the Allergan lawyers run over the other lawyer, right? So what is the typical outcome that you've seen in your other cases?
Well, I was really the only person ever doing Botox cases because of this intimidation factor. There was a Hollywood actress in the early 90s by the name of Irina Medavoy, who was married to a very famous producer out there. And she sued over Botox. She had similar problems, not as bad as Charlotte, but pretty bad. And that case went to trial, and they collected attorney's fees from her to the tune of like a couple of $1 million, and then made her sign an NDA to where she couldn't talk about it. So that was the only Botox case that had ever gone to trial when I started doing them. And I ended up trying 5 of them, won 3, lost 1, got a hung jury on the other one. But I ended up settling about 50 other cases after I finally started beating them regularly.
Wow. And so can you share a little bit more about some of the other cases? So it sounds like a lot of the injuries were not necessarily the cosmetic uses of it, but the other off-label uses of Botox. Is that right?
Right. Right. Over 2/3 of the use of Botox in the United States is off label, and that's by design. Off label means not approved by the FDA. And that's been Allergan's marketing strategy since day one. They get it approved for narrow uses, and then they aggressively market it for off-label uses, which is illegal. And they have pled guilty and paid a $600 million fine for off-label marketing. And so most of the other cases are for medical uses. Some of them were death cases, children who were injected with mega doses, children with cerebral palsy who suffered from limb spasticity and were injected with mega doses and died. Vietnam veteran who had Botox get into his brain and went into a coma and died. It's been a variety of cases. Another subcategory of Botox cases gone wrong are because Botox triggers an immune response in some people and can trigger an autoimmune disease. One of the most frequent ones suffered by Botox users is a disease known as Guillain-Barré syndrome. Guillain-Barré syndrome is a very serious, progressive neuromuscular disease, sort of like muscular dystrophy might have been the one you might have heard of.
Mm. Pretty scary. And I've also been reading up on it. And I know initially the message was that the Botox stays just in the area that it was injected, but now there seems to be research that suggests otherwise.
Right. And that research has been there since the beginning. It was just hidden by Allergan and other botulinum toxin manufacturers. Botox is short for botulinum toxin, and that is a lethal neurotoxin. It's actually the most potent toxin known to man. 1 gram can kill 1 million people. It was developed as a biological weapon. Saddam Hussein was known to have stores of it. Interesting fact, anyone who fought in the Gulf War cannot get Botox injections, or they can get them, but it won't do anything to them because they were vaccinated against botulinum toxin before going overseas.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
and so Botox is a very potent, designed to be injected into a muscle. And then what it does is it attacks a neuromuscular junction, which is the nervous system in the muscle. And it, quite frankly, destroys the neuromuscular junction to where the muscle becomes disabled. So if you think about the typical cosmetic use, you inject it into your forehead for frown lines. And if everything goes right, hopefully it goes into the small muscles of the face. It destroys the neuromuscular junction. Those muscles become dysfunctional. The reason that it only lasts 2 to 4 months is because the body regrows new nerve endings at the neuromuscular junction. And then you have to get injected again and destroy your neuromuscular junction again.
And now, after that 2 to 4 months, when it wears off and you don't see it visibly anymore, is it still in the body? Like, how long does it take for our body to actually get rid of it?
No one knows the long-term effects of botulinum toxin injections, but I can tell you, in following up on your earlier question too, the problem with almost all Botox side effects is if it gets it outside the muscle, either because of it wasn't injected properly. Occasionally, doctors use EMG guidance when injecting Botox to make sure it goes into a muscle, but 99 times out of 100, they just do it by feel. And so if it gets into the bloodstream, either because they miss the muscle with one of the injections, or also what happens is the small muscle gets overloaded with Botox and just overflows. It gets in your bloodstream. Having botulinum toxin in your bloodstream is by definition botulism. Allergan lobbied the FDA not to put the word botulism in the black box warning because they thought it would scare people, which it should. And so they instead use the term spread of toxin. But it's kind of a perfect crime. And one reason that made these cases difficult to try is that it's undetectable in the bloodstream after like the first 24, 48 hours because it's in such small quantities. I mean, we're talking about nanograms. Like I say, 1 gram can kill 1 million. And I want to talk to you about dose when you're ready too.
Yeah, no, I would love for you to share, is there any amount that you think is safe, or is there any injection site that you think is safe? Or do you think across the board, like if someone you love was thinking about getting Botox, what would you say to them?
I don't let anybody that I know or care about get Botox injections, or at least I try and talk them out of it. A lot of people get cosmetic injections, and most of the time, there's not a problem. I freely admit that. Cosmetic injections are typically lower dosage. The typical cosmetic injection is 50 or 60 units all over the face. That's over the FDA approved limit, by the way. It's only approved for 20 units in the forehead and 20 units in crow's feet, but it's typically injected at higher doses all over the face. But people get Botox for medical reasons, all kinds of medical reasons, and back problems, migraines, underarm sweating, and sometimes they'll get 100, 200, 300 units. Well, people don't understand about Botox, and what I found is a lot of the doctors who inject Botox don't realize this. It's just exactly what a unit is, because Botox is it's not measured by weight or volume. It's measured by unit, and a unit is a mouse unit, and it's the LD50 for a mouse. And LD50 is a toxicological term, meaning the lethal dose in 50% of mice injected. So on average, it's how much Botox it takes to kill a mouse. So if you go in for cosmetic injections and you get the typical dose of 50 units, you're getting enough in your face to kill 50 mice.
Wow, that's an interesting way to look at it.
I just don't know any other way to put it. You should see the doctors' faces, the plastic surgeons and stuff, when I'm asking them that on the witness stand, and it's the first time they've heard it, and they've been injecting Botox for 10 or 20 years.
Yeah. The thing that I find just like I can't believe that this is the way that things are is that the doctors aren't necessarily fully informed, or maybe they are, but then they're not fully informing the patient. So I can share my experience. I've never done it in my face because I'm way too scared to. But when I was about 16, 17 years old in the nail salon reading some celebrity tabloid weekly, I read that all of the A-list Hollywood celebrities were injecting Botox under their arms so that they wouldn't sweat in their gowns when they were on the red carpet. And at the time, I was diagnosed with hyperhidrosis, which is excessive sweating for really seemingly no reason. And this was way before I was into health and wellness and trying to figure out maybe why I was actually sweating so much. But anyway, I saw this magazine article, asked my mom, take me to the dermatologist. I want to do this treatment. So I went in and the dermatologist was like, sure, fine. And they injected, I don't remember how much. I feel like it was like at least a syringe, a whole syringe, and it didn't actually work. Like they injected all of it, and then I went home, for a couple of weeks, and I still was sweating. So I went back, and they injected another one, and I honestly don't remember if that at that time it like actually stopped the sweating. But what I do know is that my lymph nodes started swelling with some regularity. And shortly after, I did develop an autoimmune disease, which manifests as scar tissue. And it was right near the injection zone. So I don't know if they're related, but all I know is this was my experience. And looking back, I can understand how the doctor, if they knew the potential risks, how they could inject this into a 17-year-old.
Well, that story is so typical of what I've been hearing over the years. I don't do Botox cases anymore, but because I'm on the internet and I'm the only lawyer that ever took on Allergan, people still call me. I probably talked well over 1,000 people over the years, and that's a very common fact pattern. A lot of people were affected worse than you. So you're a little bit fortunate in that regard. And, the problem is this. So there's a package insert that comes. So Botox comes in a syringe, a vial, not in a syringe, comes in a vial with a tiny little speck of powder, and then they mix saline with it, and then they draw that into the syringe and inject you. Everybody's familiar with the warning label on pills and medicines when you get it, this little package insert that you unfold with all the fine print. It's not a very effective way to warn people in general. But for Botox, it's a joke because that's in the box with the vial. The patient never sees it. The nurse or the doctor opens the vial and mixes the saline and then draws up the injection and then gives you the shot. So you never even see the warning. Even if you did, you might see the black box warning because that's a very serious warning label required by the FDA only for the most dangerous drugs.
Well, that's new though, right?
Well, relatively new. That came out in 2009. I was one of the people that got that put on the product. But actually, Botox sales have gone up since then. They've gone up every year since its inception. And the black box warning didn't even put a dent in them because nobody ever sees it. Nobody even knows about it. There's also a medication guide that's required to be given to the patient. And the vast majority of patients never even see that. If they do, it's attached to the back. And we all know how much we read those informed consent forms, especially when we're in a hurry to get our cosmetic Botox and get on with our lives. So the whole warning system is totally flawed, and the doctors are totally convinced it's safe. That's because of Allergan's marketing. Their safety department has like 4 people in it, and their marketing department has like 3,500 people in it, and that is an accurate reflection of the emphasis of the company. So they've got the doctors totally convinced that it's safe, and therefore the patients are convinced that it's safe.
And can you talk about a little bit? You had mentioned earlier that they were forced to pay a $600 million fine for labeling or for promoting off-label uses of the product. So can you just share, like, what were some of their marketing practices?
Well, you're not supposed to market it for off-label uses at all. There's supposed to be zero tolerance. And now it's approved for a few narrow uses for children. But prior to about 4 years ago, it was totally not approved for any pediatric use. But in the cases I was involved in where children were injured or killed, we would go to the clinic where the children were injected, a pediatric clinic. And it turns out the Botox sales rep had called on them, once or twice a week for the last 10 years, taking the staff, lunch, taking the doctor out to dinner, stuff like that. And it was such an elaborate program. They actually established they co-opted. That was like an acronym. It's supposed to be a nonprofit educational organization for parents of children with cerebral palsy. And they co-opted that group and had them publish a lot of materials about how great Botox was for pediatric spasticity, even though that wasn't approved by the FDA because of safety reasons. And that's one of the things they got caught doing by the feds when they pled guilty.
Yeah, I think this is something pretty widespread in the pharmaceutical industry where the pharmaceutical companies wine and dine the doctors in order to get them to use more of their drugs.
Definitely. There's been some reforms in that area. It's not near as bad as it used to be, but it's definitely a problem. The same thing happened in the cosmetic arena for Botox. There was an outfit called Advanced Aesthetics, which seemed to be a completely independent educational organization. Turned out it was totally a front for Botox. The nurse who injected Charla Helton, it doesn't even have to be a doctor that injects you. It just has to be, quote unquote, under the supervision of a doctor. But she was a trainer for Advanced Aesthetics, and it turns out that was totally funded by Allergan as well.
Wow, yeah, it sounds like they're also taking a page out of the junk food industry. The junk food industry does that a lot. They'll set up a front group to promote, something, and then, publish articles and lead the public to believe one thing, and then you find out that it was all funded by the company that has a benefit for you consuming the junk food. So kind of crazy. In terms of also other side effects, what can you tell us about Botox and the crossing the blood-brain barrier?
Well, that's a pretty rare side effect, fortunately, and a very controversial one. But in the early 2000s, some Italian researchers, a fellow named Dr. Antonucci, who I had the pleasure of meeting one time, published a groundbreaking paper that traced Botox injected into rat whiskers into the brain. And that was the first time it was proven that Botox can cross the blood-brain barrier. And that came into play big time when I represented a gentleman in Richmond, Virginia, by the name of Douglas Ray. Douglas Ray fought in the Vietnam War, and he came home from that with a slight tremor in his hand. And it might have been from Agent Orange, or no one really knew what caused that. And it was mild over the years, but as he got older, it became more pronounced. And he was being treated by a neurologist at the VA center there in Richmond. And one of the off-label uses of Botox is to treat tremors in the hand. And so she injected him in the forearm. And I can't remember the exact dose. I think it was 80 or 100 units, fairly moderate dose for that kind of thing. And then it didn't work, sort of like your situation. So she hit him again in 2 weeks, which you really should wait 3 months before getting any repeat Botox injections if you're going to get them at all. But, the natural reaction of doctors is if the first one doesn't work, just like in your case, try again. So she injected him again. And then within 48 hours, he had developed a pural rash all over his body. And he became so sleepy, there's a medical term for it, it's called somnambulism, to where he could barely hold his eyes open or talk. And that lasted for a few months, and then he lapsed into a coma. And he was basically in a coma, not a deep coma. He could be roused with very loud, vigorous external stimuli. He could be roused for a few seconds. He actually came in the courtroom for a few moments, and his wife tried to rouse him. We tried that case in Richmond, Virginia, and the whole controversy was whether or not Botox could get to the brain. And we won. We proved that it could. We actually got the largest single plaintiff verdict in the history of Virginia at that time, $212 million, because the jury was very mad that Allergan had hid all these dangers. The doctor who injected him actually was incensed by what she had been told by Allergan and became a leading researcher and anti-Botox advocate, and still is to this day. Although I'm not going to say her name because Allergan has set out to try and destroy her career as a result of the papers she's published.
Wow. And what about you? Like, have you faced any backlash from trying all of these cases?
No, I mean, I don't get any Christmas cards from them, but they don't like me or anything. But yeah, they can't really do anything to me. They've run several other physicians' careers though that have taken stands against them. I've talked to several of them over the years. It's hard to find expert witnesses to testify in these cases because of that.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, even like I said earlier, it was really hard to find someone who had both the knowledge and was actually willing to talk. So that definitely suggests something. Now, because you've represented over 50 people, is there anything that stands out or anything that you learned or anything you want people to know, from your experience working with these Botox victims?
Well, everybody has to weigh the benefits and risk of any drug. And with Botox, it's the most lethal neurotoxin on earth. Its dosage is measured in lethality. It usually doesn't hurt you, but there's many, many thousands and thousands of cases of spread of toxin and botulism, terrible neuromuscular diseases, brain damage. And so those are the risks. And then you have to weigh that against the benefit, which is you won't have wrinkles in your forehead for 3 months. And if you're unhappy, nobody will be able to tell because you have this permanently surprised look on your face and you can't frown. So I just try and explain the facts to people and then let them decide for themselves. A much tougher case is people that have children with severe cerebral palsy and severe spasticity. Some of these children are so affected that their limbs are permanently drawn up and they can develop very painful contractures in their joints as a result of spasticity. There's no cure for spasticity. There's some heavy-duty oral and IV medications that have tons of side effects. There's some radical surgery that involves sawing through tendons and whatnot. The best therapy for it is just constant stretching and massage, which is partially effective and a lot of work. And so these parents and their doctors, many of whom are, well, most of whom are well intentioned, are desperately looking for a cure for that. And the risk of spasticity are high, and so people are willing to take a chance. Unfortunately, the doses required to treat spasticity in children are reaching toxic levels, and most of the worldwide deaths from Botox are children being treated for pediatric spasticity. So that one's a tougher call because it's a life or death situation either way. But I just try and explain the facts to them. And anybody that, all the people that I've talked to over the years that have learned the facts ahead of time have chosen not to get Botox and have dealt with spasticity other ways. The ones that do choose to get treated usually end up hiring me after the fact under not so great circumstances.
And for someone who perhaps recently has had Botox and then has developed some mysterious symptoms, what should they do or what can they do?
Well, not much is a short answer. I talk to people about this all the time. There's no cure for any of these Botox side effects. There's no cure for botulism. People that develop severe botulism from eating tainted food, they get put on a ventilator. It's just supportive care. All you can do is treat the symptoms. If you have an autoimmune disease, there are certain treatments for autoimmune disease, but none of them terribly effective. Usually, the Botox side effects, if you survive them, will eventually wear off. That's not guaranteed. Some of them are permanent. Another thing that it causes in children that are injected is seizures. And seizure disorder is usually a lifelong and life-threatening affliction. And there's no diagnostic test that can confirm what you're suffering from was due to Botox. Now, there is a antitoxin available from the CDC, but it has to be ordered by a physician, and it's only effective within like the first 2 or 3 days, and it's only partially effective, but they won't even give it to you. There's no sense in even taking it after the first 2 or 3 days. So medically speaking, I'm not a doctor, of course, but just treat the symptoms and try and get a lot of diagnostic tests to make sure it's not something else. There's something else going on where it's just a coincidence of the timing. But if it is from the Botox, there's not much you can do except treat the symptoms. Legally, what you can do these days is almost similarly limited. So, a quick primer on pharmaceutical litigation. There's 3 types of ways to hold a product manufacturer liable in the United States. There's a manufacturing defect. If there's a bad batch, that's very rare and never has really occurred with Botox that we can prove. There's a design defect, which is these products are so inherently bad that they should never be used on the market. And the proof for design defect is so difficult that it will not apply to Botox, and it wouldn't apply to 99% of pharmaceutical products. And so almost all of the pharmaceutical litigation that you hear about, Biox, Botox, and stuff like that, Fin, all of those mass torts, those are all failure to warn cases. That's really the only cause of action available to victims of pharmaceutical injuries in the United States. And failure to warn case is based on the premise that the manufacturer had information about the risks that it didn't pass along to the medical community and the public in the form of the label, the package insert. And before Botox had a black box warning in 2009, they had all the information about all the risks because deaths and injuries were being reported to them all the time. They had problems in their own clinical trials. They had all the information. They just chose to not publish it, so they didn't want to hurt sales. And so almost all of the cases I tried were people that were injected prior to 2009, before the black box warning came out. So now if you got a Botox shot and suffered ill consequences and tried to sue them for failure to warn, they would pull out the package insert and they would read to you a warning that exactly what happened to you, your doctor was warned against. And so that has the effect of insulating the manufacturer pretty much from liability, and it puts the onus on the doctor. So then people, basically your only option is some kind of medical malpractice action, and those have rarely been successful.
Wow. I feel like I've learned so much, and it's, it's just like, wow. I feel like it's become so popular now, and it's become, especially I think with social media, the use of these cosmetic injectables has just become so commonplace, and even younger and younger women, especially men as well, I'm sure do it as well. But wow, all the things that they don't tell you before going in. So I really appreciate you sharing all of this. Any last thoughts or any last things, you think our audience should know?
Well, I'm glad you had me on, because I spend so much time and have spent so much time over the last 10, 12 years talking to people after the fact. They got Botox, nobody warned them about anything, and now they're very, very sick and scared and wanting to know what to do. And you've just heard my speech on what you can do, which is not much. And it's just very depressing to me. And so I relish the opportunity to talk to people, perhaps on the front end. And I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I just like for people to have all the facts. And so I'm glad you gave me this opportunity today.
Wonderful. Well, let's end on a happy note, since this is the Happier and Healthier podcast. So I would love for you to leave our listeners with just one tip or piece of advice for how they could live a happier and healthier life.
Well, I don't know much about that. I'll leave that to you. But in terms of what we've been talking about, Botox, and especially with women and men, I think the human face is designed to express emotions and to change gracefully over the years. And any attempt to alter that is just not natural. It doesn't really improve your looks. You might think it does in the short term, but just age gracefully and naturally, and be able to use your expressions in your face. We want to know what you're thinking.
Well said. Thank you so much. And thank you for being on the show.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me.
And may I add that the most effective way to prevent or delay wrinkling of the skin is your diet and lifestyle. Your food is your best defense. Also avoiding things like too much sun exposure, drinking, smoking, all of these things degrade your collagen. Sugar also promotes inflammation. Any refined carbohydrate products, those are not good for your skin. What is good for your skin is tons of fresh produce. Your veggies and your fruit are rich in vitamin C and antioxidants, and of course a boatload of other nutrients that support a healthy body and healthy skin. And there is actually some research that suggests that women who consume higher amounts of vitamin C through their diet, so not a supplement, but through fruits and veggies, their skin is younger looking, less wrinkled, less creases, and contains more moisture, so it's less dry. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, the diet and lifestyle habits that can contribute to skin wrinkling, you can head to mariamarlowe.com/blog, click the skin and beauty section, and I have some articles under there.